All right, it's 9 o'clock. We're going to start. Can everybody see my screen, or can anybody see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk today about how to write policies and procedures. And policies and procedures are really the core of um, your compliance activities. So we're going to introduce what cybersecurity is. How do you know if your policy and or procedure is right? Filling out a form, we're going to do that today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how document and change control work, and then answer questions. So cybersecurity has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people, but for our context, we're talking about like FedRAMP, PCI, NIST 800-171, CMMC. We're talking about those frameworks, compliance protocols, or what some people call controls. So there are a list of controls that each of these agencies or government bodies require you to maintain. And part of that maintenance process is to either have certain technologies like multi-factor authentication in place, and or policies and procedures that describe in detail how you meet those requirements, or how you meet those controls, or how those controls are implemented, or how those controls are possibly not in place, but how you would action them if they were. If a control required that you transport sensitive documents from one of your facilities to another, and you're like, well, look, I don't have two facilities, you would still want to fill out the process that said, if I had to transport data, here are the activities that I would perform in respect to that particular activity. So from our perspective, cybersecurity and cybersecurity compliance has to do with, for this particular module, has to do with policies and procedures, and how to fill out and have a good policy and a procedure set. So Lionfish is a compliance, portal. And what you're going to be able to do in Lionfish is that you are going to be able to store all these documents. If not, you'd have to store them in like a OneDrive or a Google Drive, or or a SharePoint or something similar to that, or your computer's hard drive. And then you would have to sort them all by, what number they were, and then you would all have to include all of the data that went along with it. If who owned it, what, was anybody responsible for it? Was anybody working on it? Does anybody need to work on it? Do you need to review it yearly? Can you share it with an auditor? All those different things are capable through Lionfish. So if you don't have Lionfish, or you don't have a compliance tracking or monitoring tool, I highly suggest you get one, because you're going to be disorganized if you don't, and it's going to just take a lot more time. It'll take 3 times more time without a compliance monitoring tool to do this job, to keep all your policies, procedures, and your controls updated and in place, and properly maintained. It's just 3 times more time. That's a lot. Especially if you're dealing with 110 controls, 3 times each control taking maybe 5 extra minutes, that's 150 minutes. That's just a lot of extra time that you don't need to waste, that you can't get back from your day. Okay, so is my policy and procedure right? How do I know if it's right or not? How can I tell? Who's going to tell me if it's right? Um, I have an example of something rock solid um, that will tell you if it's right or not. This is not super. This is not the way it is for every single control, but this is a good example of a control that the government helps you with. It's FIPS compliance. So you have encryption levels inside of your system, and tracking encryption of your hard drives, encryption of data moving, encryption of data at rest, encryption of backup data. And you're like, well, what's the proper encryption algorithm? What's the proper, what is it? 1028, 2040, what is it? You don't know. So what you have to do is the government tells you, they give you this website where you can go to, and it'll tell you, okay, here is the requirement. You need to have certain levels of cryptographic um, standards that need to be in place. It'll tell you, here's the place where you will be notified of what is the current level. It's 140-3. They'll tell you if it's going to be deprecated and when it's going to be deprecated and when the next particular 140-4 comes out. So they'll keep you updated about what it is. So your ability to know, is my policy and procedure correct? Am I following the latest, FIPS compliance? So yeah, that's part one. Then you got to go, well, what does it need to be? Well, they give you a document that oh, let me open this doc. Or, oops. They give you a document that allows you to look at what it is that you need to do. So here it is, the process, the standard. This is what your policy and procedure needs to follow. These are the guidelines that it needs to follow. So if you're asking yourself, am I doing this right? If you meet the requirements for cryptographic modules that they lay out in here, if you read this, it's extremely exciting to read. It talks about cryptographic algorithms, but you get through it, you'll know what is the right standard that I should be using, what is the proper cryptographic modules that I need to be using. And then once you've done that, you can meet the requirement, you can meet your controls requirement by filling out the right information from this particular guideline. So they tell you exactly what to do in here and what level of encryption you need to deploy in order to meet your policy and procedure goal. So this is not normal. I showed you this because at least this is a more structured, standardized methodology. It'll tell you, look, here's what you need to do. This particular standard has this particular level of requirement. For instance, if you were to look at like multi-factor authentication or your identity module, it doesn't have a guideline like this. It will just say to you, have a multi-factor authentication product in place. Use multi-factor authentication. And so when you're going to your process, your policy, your procedure, you're going to ask yourself, well, am I using the right multi-factor authentication product? Is it been approved by the government? If there is no scheduled implementation like this FIPS implementation, which describes to you exactly what level of encryption you need, if there isn't this, then you are okay to provide a best effort approach. So that means that if you have multi-factor authentication and you can answer, yes, I do have it, it's from Duo, you don't have to ask yourself, is that going to meet the requirements of the government? If the government doesn't have this particular sheet, this particular requirement or excerpt, you just do a best effort approach. So your best effort approach is that, yeah, I have multi-factor authentication. You can say, yes, I have it. Number two, you can say it's from Duo, and that's good enough. You do not have to struggle to figure out if the products you're deploying are acceptable by the government or acceptable by the body that you're using, because you're taking a best effort approach and you are doing what you are supposed to be doing. Because the government or your vendor can't say to you, well, you're using LDAP, which is lightweight directory application protocol, instead of Active Directory, or you're using IAS from Amazon instead of Azure Active Directory. That's wrong. No one's going to tell you that. Using any one of those four products is okay because that's what you chose to do. And so the government really doesn't, or your vendor doesn't really have an opinion other than these particular modules where I pointed this out because it would be unfair to say they have absolutely no input. They do. They have certain things like this, like FIPS, like encryption, where they'll tell you, okay, here is um, here is the requirement, and here's what we expect you to do. Here's the level of encryption we need you to have. And so it's laid out in these documents. And then these documents are constantly moving forward, updating, and you need to just keep your eye out for any changes that may occur. So when FIPS 140-3 comes, or 140-4 comes out, you need to be aware of it. You need to prepare yourself for that policy change. But other than that, if you have multi-factor authentication through, LastPass or Duo or Microsoft, you're okay to use those products. There's no question as to whether or not you can use them. All right, a policy needed procedure. So you want to create a framework of a document that you use every single time. Your document framework should be following some very basic, routines so that you have a template. And basically what we're doing here is we're just going to describe a template that will work, that no one's going to say this doesn't look great. What you can do is just call out the code of the policy and a procedure in the very beginning of what you're going to be doing. This one's CA2159, develop and implement plans of action designed to correct deficiencies and reduce or eliminate vulnerabilities in organizational systems. This is a control. So you're saying, look, my policy and procedure is all about this control. Now I've seen it where people have had master lists of controls. They don't want to have a separate document for every single control. What I've seen people do is create what's called a security policy. And within that security policy, they create these sub-policies or these sections of their security policy that address each of these policies and procedures. This is somewhat more of an easy way of managing it, because instead of having 110 separate documents, you might have 11 or 12 documents that, some of them should be separate, like maybe a mobile device policy, because you might give it to people. So you don't want to give them a whole giant stack called the security policy, or a password policy. You might want to say, okay, here, everybody who starts needs to look at this password policy we have, or document control policy, where they don't really need to read all 110 of your policies. They could just look at smaller sets of policies. So I would keep that in mind. If you need to give out policies or change policies on a regular basis, I wouldn't put them all into the one giant document, but you can create what's called a security policy and put like 5 or 6 or 10 policies in there that are all related to one another, because they're probably going to say the same thing over and over again. Like a perfect example is your access control policy. There's like 10 or 15 controls in CMMC and in NIST 800-171 that talk about groups and who in the groups have access to what, and do they have limitations or not. And each of the controls are separate. So if you have this access control policy, it meets like 10 controls if you just write it correctly. If you say, okay, here's my group structure, here and who has groups, here has least privilege, here who has privilege, here here's how I add people to the group, here's how I remove people to the group, that kind of thing. If you create that access control policy, you can use it over and over again in your list of controls that you meet. So what we've done here as well is that we've put in cross frameworks. So if you are a person that needs to have more than one framework, like you need to have ISO or NIST 800, 171 and 53, you might want to make it so that the document is readily visible, that you can add it to different frameworks, so that you have it, at least okay, if I change this, I don't got to go over and change it again for the other controls. But we've added a bunch of different ones for this particular one to show you that you can use the same control, the same document over and over again in other controls. So you want to identify the purpose. You want to tell describe what's going to be done to fulfill the requirement. You want to write in a scope, responsibility, and then sanctions or compliance if you fail to comply. So the purpose of the document is pretty simple. You're just going to try to meet the control. This pretty much tells you we're going to meet the control. The second part, the organization will. This is this is the meat and taters of it. This is where you put in what exactly you do. So develop and implement plans to action designed to correct deficiencies. I put that in there. It's not the solution. The solution is we use Tenable.io to do vulnerability scans against our infrastructure. We perform these vulnerability scans on a regular basis every month or every week. We then process any alerts as P1, P2, P3, P4, on and on. So what is it that you do? Now, this is where I was telling you earlier, there's no like correct verbiage to put in here other than you are doing the best effort you can in order to fulfill that requirement. Now, do you need to vulnerability scan your infrastructure every day? No. Do you need to vulnerability scan your infrastructure every week? No. Do you need to vulnerability scan your infrastructure? Yes. Yes, you do. So when are you going to do it is up to you. Now, I've seen an auditor from Boeing come back and say, you are not vulnerability scanning your infrastructure as many times as we would prefer you to do that. So then everybody had to come together, have a change control meeting, and decide, are we going to do multiple vulnerability scans on our network? The IT infrastructure people said it will not put an additional strain on our network. So go ahead, we can do it. That change was approved, and they changed their policy to meet the requirements for vulnerability scanning that Boeing was asking for. That's not uncommon. A lot of your vendors, a lot of the Department of Defense people are going to ask you if you can change your policy or procedure to meet one of their internal requirements. Those internal requirements are going to be different for every company. They're going to be different for every organization, and they're going to be different for the government. Now, like I said, the government does produce a list of what they expect to have you do. So that's not as secretive as what maybe Lockheed Martin wants you to do. Lockheed Martin's going to want you to change your passwords every 30 days. Are you going to do it? Now, you don't have to do it. You can say no. And what will happen is 9 times out of 10, it's going to degrade your overall score with that company. Your company's going to score you on how well your policies and procedures are being done. If you've got them all and you're 100%, you're probably going to score a perfect score. You're 100%. But if you're maybe 5 or 10 points down, you're going to get a lesser classification inside those organizations. Now, what will that do? It may not qualify you to work on particular projects within those organizations. So if an organization requires a higher score to work on a project, it might mean that you need to change one of your policies and procedures to meet the requirement of that vendor, of the government, or of that particular contract. Because a contract might include multiple vendors that have different requirements. So I've seen that as well, where a policy and procedure has needed to be changed based on the requirement that they give you. But if in here I say that, look, I use Tenable, I do a system scan, I do a vulnerability scan. Once a vulnerability is detected, we mark it as a P1 through P4. We enter it into the ticketing system. You can even show a screenshot for evidential purposes of this particular control of the fact that you run system scans, or you might even upload the entire system scan for that particular scan period into your Lionfish platform or your document control platform, or wherever you're keeping all your documents, and then also you're able to refer back to it. You're able to show an auditor that you're doing it, etc. The scope tells, what does this include? Does this include multiple sites? Does this include particular applications? What is included in the scope? You detail that out here. You also might want, the scope will help you if you need to separate the policy between different organizational units. So some scopes reflect on internal systems. Some scopes reflect on executive staff. Some scopes reflect on administrative users like admins and so on and so forth. not all scopes apply to all of the members of the entire organization. So you want to call out who this affects, because that helps you identify when you need to make a change, what organizations or organizational units you need to update and give information to if something were to change with a policy. That's super helpful because you don't want to send out a policy change to the entire company when you don't really need to. You want to maybe send it out to that particular group. So you want to make sure that your policy applies to, your organizational units. Responsibilities. Who is responsible for the document is critical. So you want to just call out that person, the CISO, IT manager, the HR manager, the CEO, whoever. You want to call that out in the document. And then you want to call out sanctions if failure to meet um, the policy is in place. Now, some sanctions and compliance will cause you, and especially in the PCI world and the HIPAA world, they they may require that you take legal actions. Like if a policy is not followed, if someone's doing nefarious acts and they're not following the policy, like they broke into the company or whatever, or so on and so forth, or they used someone else's ID to gain access to a room, for instance, then you would need to possibly take legal actions against them. And some of HIPAA and PCI sanctions need to be really fleshed out well. You can't just say this statement. You have to actually say, we're going to report them to the FBI, and then we'll take the following steps, so on and so forth. So be aware that some of these areas for different control sets are not, they're not just boilerplate. Like for especially for PCI and HIPAA, you need to have a well fleshed out sanction and compliance section. Okay, and then every document, you should pretty much have a baseline template inside the document that shows what it's for, the regulatory body, the control number, the description. If it has related documents, you want to make sure that you have a change control meeting, and that during the change control meeting that you outline what the changes are that are going to be done to this document. You want to put in who the users are that are going to be affected by this, what user initiated the change, so on and so forth, the date, if it's pending, if it's been approved, if you're waiting on something, if it refers to an entry in your POAM, or you're waiting on a vendor or whatever, you want to put that in this document. And then you want to have somebody sign off on it. And then you want to store this document once you're complete with the document. You want to store this document in a document control system. So the whole need for like a Lionfish product is to keep track of all of these different components, because you must do that. Okay, so change control is something that is important. You need to have a meeting of the change control members, and then that change control has to be presented. Now, you're like, I am a one-man show. What do I do? You have to have a meeting still, and you should have meeting. I would have meeting minutes. What was discussed last? Nothing's going to be discussed as other than with yourself, which is okay. You're just going through the motions. You need to go through the motions of having meeting minutes. You're not going to be discussing anything with anybody because you're alone. But you're going to say, look, here are the things that I've considered that were up for consideration last time, that I had this particular slot of time set aside for this particular activity, because there's really no meeting. You can't have a meeting with yourself, but there's a slot of time you set aside to review your policies and procedures. Last time you were reviewing 6 or 7 policies. This is the result of it. This is what happened during these are the items you're going to have to discuss during this meeting or consider during that meeting. Now, if you do have a group of people, then it's great, because then you can follow the meeting guidelines. What are we going to talk about this time? What did we talk about last time? Does anybody agree with this, or does anyone disagree with this? And then if that's the case, that you make notes of all that during the meeting, and then you store those meeting minutes, and you move forward. Now, there is a control amongst all these controls, virtually almost all the control sets, that have a control called review all your policies and procedures. How often do you need to do that? At least once a year. You need to go through all your policies and procedures and touch them all one time a year. So look at it. If it's relevant, if it's not changed, move on to the next one. If you need to pull one out and say, okay, we bought another building, then you need to modify your policy or your procedure that says here, this now is the case because we have multiple buildings. Or you might want to say, look, we created a new department. And so you're going to want to add that department into your policy and procedure information, because your policies and procedures do get down to a granular level. These particular groups are within our company. These are the groups that have access to this, and those are the groups that have access to that. The marketing group has access to the marketing folder. The engineering group has access to the engineering folder. The executive group has access to the financial folders, to the project management folders, and all these other different folders. The admins have access to this. So you created a new group. You need to add in that group what that group has access to and what that group does. So can you review your policies and procedures more than once a year? Absolutely. You can do it every day if you want. You can do it every month. Does the government or vendors require this? Other than the once a year deal, no. As long as you're keeping track of your policies and procedures on a semi-regular basis, then you're good. Now, I made a change to something and my policy and procedure doesn't reflect it. Am I going to get in trouble? No, you're not going to get in trouble because no one's like monitoring your policies and procedures. But if someone asks to do an audit and you don't have that changed, that's going to be a red flag. So then, yes, before an audit, you should just do a policy and procedure tab where you go through and you look at all your policies and procedures. This is where having them all in one place, like a security policy, is going to be helpful to you, because then you can just look at that document, scroll through it. You don't have to open 110 documents over and over and over again, forgetting where you were last and so on and so forth. You could just have a security policy with all of them in it and just roll through virtually all of them and just make sure they're correct, and then let the auditor see it. So is anyone going to check your work? Yes, someone might check your work. So I have had a vendor or an auditor look at a policy and see what I said and say, show me the money, show me the proof. And then usually we'll have the evidence. So you need to have, in CMMC, you need to have two pieces of evidence. In NIST 800-171, they require one piece of evidence. So what is evidence? It's a screenshot. The policy can be the evidence. The policy that you have, like if you have a policy that says you can't piggyback, key cards, it's a little hard to show a screenshot of that. But you have the policy, so you're good. If you want to show a screenshot of the fact that you have key cards assigned to individuals, that also might help. That might be your second piece of evidence. But there's really no way to show that you can't piggyback on key cards other than taking a picture of somebody or filming one person going through at a time and showing that video. I mean, that's a little extreme. So, but you should have the policy as your piece number one of your evidence, and you should have something to support it as well. If you have the different encryption levels, you want to show that FIPS compliant document, you want to show your policy, and then you want to show a file that's encrypted, a screenshot of a file, or you want to show a screenshot of like BitLocker saying this is an encrypted system. Please enter your encryption code in order to move forward. And then you can also show maybe a screenshot of BitLocker's encryption algorithm inside the registry to show that you are actually following what you should be following. So don't think that your policies and procedures can be written without some kind of evidence set up against it. The policy itself can be the evidence, and something else should be the evidence for CMMC 3. You have to show two pieces of evidence. All right, that's the how to write policies and procedures. So we can go to the chat. Nobody's chatted. All right. We can answer questions. Anybody have any questions about how to write a policy and procedure, what it is they need to do? We went over what it should look like, scope, purpose, all the different ways of writing a document, document control, um, evidence, what is an auditor going to look for, um, what it looks like when the government gives you a guideline, what it looks like when they don't. The We have templates inside of Lionfish's product. I would have to log in. I'm not logged into it currently, but if you get a demo of the Lionfish product, you can see how they handle templates, and that'd be great. If that'd be great for you to do is look at the templates, the way they handle them. They have all kinds of different um, processes for doing that. They have task lists, the template inside of Lionfish. They have guidelines on how to fill it out, tutorials. You can also ask Jeremy or Lionfish for a replay of this particular show. Last time everyone was getting the shows sent to them after this, so you definitely can get um, a replay of the show. You can get the template, how to fill out the template demo. You can also log in. Yeah. Um, Compliance would also include auto dealerships, new compliance, correct? Yes. Yeah, if you have a particular control set, you can it's either already in Lionfish, they'll put it into Lionfish for you, or you can work through making sure that the particular frameworks are lined up with whatever you need to do. So if and usually these policies and procedures are commonly named. So if it's like you need to have a access control policy, it's not going to be a surprise to you when you pull out your access control policy from another framework, that it will definitely meet this control. So definitely do that. Anybody else have any questions? I'm watching the chat here. You can also ask for the other shows. You can ask Jeremy or Lionfish for um, for those shows. He'll send them to you, and then I think that they're probably in a show repository as well. And then yeah, he could just send you the links to the shows, and you can see. You can also re-listen to this show. Yeah, he's going to have a YouTube channel, so that you can click on the shows, all of them, all at once, so you can just listen to me for 6 or 8 hours continuously, especially like on a long trip somewhere. You should just play my voice the whole time. Yeah, that's fun. All right, anybody else have anything? We'll give them a couple more minutes. Okay. Oh, he put the link in the chat for the channel. Great. So everybody who wants to see the link, or go to the chat to the YouTube channel where all of the videos will, all the you know podcasts with are, that'd be great. If you reach out to Jeremy, you can get uh, a demo of the canned policies and procedures that are already in Lionfish. If you if you email him, he can send you. He can even send you a template. Probably he'll do whatever you say, virtually. Anybody else? All right, if that's it, if that's all, then we'll wrap this up, and I'll see you guys next week. Yeah, again, try and get with Jeremy and ping him about, and he'll send you all the stuff you need. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.